Is this your association? You're tapping the same sponsors year after year for access to the same budget. You know these buyers have deep pockets and can afford to spend way more. So you've added more offerings to your media kit, but they're not biting. If that sounds familiar, then this episode's for you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Association Amplified podcast. We explore solutions to bridge the member value gap, the biggest threat to associations today. Today, our special guest is Dan Stevens, founder of Worker Bee TV, and today we're going to be talking all about monetization and what makes associations so special in the eyes of sponsors. Dan, thanks for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure. Good to be here.
So, Dan, you've been in the association world for a long time now.
I have
a little bit of a, network and reputation to you, a large collection of friends from associations and, of course, other partners. I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. I think there's a deep well of knowledge there, through all of your years of helping associations with their monetization and non-dues revenue journey. To get things started, I think a good place to start would just to be kind of frame the problem that we're going to be talking about today. And, I feel like there's a lot of banter in the community about non-dues revenue, which is good, but I think there's definitely some areas where we could contribute here and probably fill in some gaps, because I feel like there's also some misconceptions or even some very important points that often just get mixed in conversation.
Sure. I mean, associations by their very nature, being nonprofits, rely on non-dues revenue because they've priced their dues model so that the average member can go, wow, I can't get this value at this price anywhere else. And so that's a good thing for the member. It puts pressure on the association to find recurring non-dues revenue streams to fund programming, because programming is what will determine whether or not those members stay.
Yeah, so if we were going to back up a bit, I'd zoom out and say, okay, we need revenue to drive mission. There's just no escaping that, right? So we can rely in part, obviously, with our dues, but some fraction of that, we're going to need to generate revenue in other means.
Right.
So one of those buckets in which we can rely is pulling on industry partners, sponsors, to be able to find good opportunities where it's a good win-win situation. And, speaking with folks in the association space, I'm very bullish that, hey, folks are not giving themselves enough credit in terms of what do they have, right? I've said this before on the podcast, and I'm sorry for anyone that's listening again, but in a previous life, I did a considerable amount of buying in my day. And look, folks, I'll say to you this way is that if you can go to someone and say, hey, I'm going to give you a buy here, and it's 100% of that buy is going straight to your target audience, I'm saying sign me up, right? That just in itself is a big value. And it's something that you can't get through ultimately what are very competitive means through, pay-per-click advertising or something like this. So on one hand, there's never been more options from a digital standpoint to even still traditional media for buyers, more inventory for them to play with, a lot of sophisticated inventory, retargeting, things like this. But still, the association has an ace up its sleeve, which is that even the most sophisticated retargeting programs can't compete with, and that is, hey, we know who's in this pool, who's in this audience, and that's your target customer.
And that pool is generally, not a junior person, a little more senior person, someone who probably has the ability to buy whatever that sponsor may be selling. They are a homogeneous group, as you mentioned, but there's also that extra kind of intangible of what is the authenticity that being aligned with the association in your marketing provides that sponsor. That intangible is usually the premium or opportunity to generate more non-dues revenue, but also for you to help make sure that that sponsor's messaging is aligned with the way you want them to communicate to your members, so that you don't, short-term use that authenticity, and as opposed to making sure that you're just building it continually. What I mean by that is just helping the sponsor make sure that they're communicating effectively and appropriately to your members, because you already know how to do that. And so you can help them.
Yeah, that's a great point. You are getting that, not only just the right eyeballs, but you're actually, that guidance from the association, it really is really worth something. And that kind of segues into another point I wanted to stop at as we kind of frame the topic today, which is that the buyers out there are looking for opportunities. They want to use their dollars wisely. And there's definitely been, I would say in the last decade, we're probably at the height of pressure in terms of how well does a marketing dollar need to perform, right? There's just, there's the talk of marketing's expected to do more with less, which I think is actually an unfair and slightly cynical way of looking at it. It's more like each dollar should be optimized.
Right.
That's probably the best way to think about it, at least in my position. But I'll say this, is that those in the industry have a great deal that they can contribute to the association, not just in terms of their dollars, but actually in their competency.
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, up until the time of COVID, the average revenue stream for sponsorships was around conferences, around magazines. It was brand advertising. It was lanyards and all kinds of different gimmicks, other than the exhibit booth, maybe at the hall, which is where they actually had a voice. Then during COVID, as people needed revenue and they didn't have events, they started opening their doors, and they started to realize that just what you said, Marcus, which is the sponsors are smart. They're the first ones to deliver new technology. They're the first ones to see a case study through to fruition. They're the first ones to get the both good and bad lessons from any change. And we live in a constant state, an increasing rate of change. So we need that feedback. And if you can lean on your sponsors to tell those stories, not only will they pay you to tell those stories, but you will be filling out your content calendar with really rich content to educate your members, typically on topics that you don't have the expertise to do. So you can round out your content calendar, round out the frequency that you're pulling that audience into your brand, your website, and make a whole bunch of money along the way.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. We know that innovation comes from the private sector, and if you're a trade association or a professional association or a mix of either, you're kind of still in the same boat, right? Is that you're going to have innovative companies that are creating essentially a lot of conversation. Innovation drives conversation. It drives people to have to keep up. And that's where the conversation comes from, right? So if your association is delivering on this much, but the industry conversation is this big, that means there's a big gap between what your members are actually looking for and then potentially what you're providing to them. So that is to say that there's just a lot of room for growth.
So let's just take that analogy. Let's imagine that the association who's listening has 200 booths at their conference. And each one of those booths has 2 stories a year, just 2 stories that they can share. That's 400 stories. If you're making $2,000 or $3,000 each, it's over $100,000 of new non-dues revenue, while all of those fresh ideas are shared. Now, that's just one angle, though. Just think of every industry, profession or trade. Just think of all the legal and law changes there are in a year. Do you think the members have time to keep up on those? What they want is something concise. So if you have lawyers, as an example, who are affiliate members or partner members to your association, you can lean on them to put that into common language, to put that into, what does this mean? Is this something I really need to worry about or not need to worry about? And again, they'll pay to play. And so you can use this as an opportunity to fund your content calendar, enrich your content calendar, and just have a more diverse content calendar.
Yeah, that's really great. There's so much opportunity for associations to play a role in facilitating that conversation, that providing those insights. And it doesn't mean that you need to have an army of experts in-house. Like, you can utilize by engaging with those industry partners and create relationships that are not just transactional, but are truly a partnership that stands the test of time.
Right. And content marketing is not a new idea. It's been around for a long time now. It's been growing. Those sponsors are building content because they need it for their own websites, their own social media activity. So they may even have it already ready to go. It just needs to be as seen on your platform, on your website, in your brand. And so it can be quite easy to have a conversation with a sponsor and find out what is the content that they're generating for their website. And where's the intersection with that content and what your members need, those pillar topics that, whether it be on the legal example or on an innovation example or on a best practices example, bringing that forward and going, yeah, this one fits and that one doesn't, and weeding it down to the ones that make sense.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think a good place for us to go now is get into the weeds a little bit about tactics. And perhaps we could just frame for the conversation ahead, if we could categorize what are the buckets, if you will, of opportunities for sponsors. How can we kind of categorize? Because I feel like sponsorship is just this big bucket. And inside of it, you have, put your logo by the lunch to, like, here's a lanyard to here's a $100,000 package, So how would you go about, from a content perspective, a digital perspective probably is more appropriate. How would you go about, just so the audience and us have a bit of a framework that we can share?
Well, first I'll segregate, the big one, which is the conference, right? The conference is always been a huge opportunity for exhibit and sponsorship and advertising revenue, and it will continue to be. Right? People want to deal in person with people. So continue to do what you're doing with your exhibits and your advertising and your content marketing opportunities at your event. Where appropriate, inject more content marketing, because that usually is the growth opportunity compared to just more brand advertising. But then there's that all year long opportunity, which is really missed by most associations. And that is to turn your website into a media hub, into a place where members can be educated in between conferences, where they can find rich content, whether it be videos or podcasts or articles, or courses when appropriate, to learn on those hot topics. And so if you look again at that content calendar and you look at that list of exhibitors or sponsors, go down that list and say, what can this sponsor speak on as an expert? And make a note. And then right beside it, checkbox, will my members care? If you check the box, then that's the discussion with that sponsor. If you go to the sponsor and say, hey, you want to put some content marketing up? They'll just look at you glass-eyed. But if you come to them and say, like that legal example, can you speak on this issue? They'll tell you right away, yes, we're an expert on that, or no, we're not. And if they meet the criteria of being an expert, lean in and they'll pay to play, and you'll end up with some free but powerful content.
Let's transition into how can associations make their content attractive to sponsors. We dipped into that a little bit already, but perhaps we can go a little bit deeper. Is there what's a good place to start here? Because this is a bit of a rabbit hole.
Well, if you think of your core member values, like your events and your learning management system, and if you have a magazine, they are all funded in some way, pay-per-view, sponsorship, advertising, whatever that model is, exhibits and so forth at the events, so that you can make that member value the best it can be and you can continually improve it. The same is true of your website. You need your website in a digital world as you're trying to attract more and more younger people who are digital first, not only digital first, phone first, right? Small phone frames first, although the phones are getting bigger. You need to engage them where they want to go first to learn, which is online. So taking that approach of tying in your content to generate revenue so you can have the very best content, because when you're online, you also have a bazillion competitors. And so are you the authority? Well, brand-wise, you probably are. But if you go into a Google search, are you truly on even the first page? Because you need to be both a digital authority in order to attract young people. And so focusing on, as we were talking about, leveraging sponsors for content is a good way to make money and round out your content calendar. But you also have the content you produce or that you can repurpose from your events. That's your editorial content per se, or from your magazine. That too can support another type of revenue called advertising and sponsorship around the content. So you kind of break the two up and say, well, either the sponsor is the content and they meet the standards of education that you put down, or do we allow them to be around our content so that our content is also generating revenue so we can invest to make more of our content, right? And so either way, or actually collectively, those two models should generate enough revenue for you to be best in class without it costing you a penny.
I think that's really useful. So just to kind of summarize that for everyone, we have a good framework to work off here. We have advertising, sponsorship, content marketing. So those are 3 buckets of inventory for in terms of digital offerings that we can engage with. And I want to go back into that and give a little bit more detail for folks so they can really use it, because I think it is very useful to think about these things categorically, right? Because it gets really messy if we're not using words properly when it comes to sponsorship opportunities. And then we also spoke about editorial content versus what could be what?
Content marketing content, right?
Right. So,
or sponsored content.
What is the type of content that we actually don't need to have potential experts sit down and essentially write a whole article for? And I love this type of content. One, I mean, it's easy to enjoy because you're getting a very authentic delivery from people and you kind of really get to know them, which is always so fun. And like, this is very indicative of the times. We don't need to belabor on this podcast where content is in terms of this type of style, right? The explosion of podcasts, yada, yada, yada. So let's circle back to what I mentioned. So advertising, sponsorship, and content marketing, let's kind of lay down the ground rules for what those are.
So advertising is your classic, in a digital sense, is your classic banner ads around editorial content, around an article, around a video, around, in a podcast, that kind of thing. Could even be a small commercial. And they can generate some decent revenue from the traffic that continues to come from your membership and from your non-members, those people on your newsletter that you also invite to consume that content on your website. Whereas sponsorship is kind of halfway in between content marketing and advertising. It's more brand alignment, if you will. So for example, let's imagine I'm in the supply chain and I'm in robotics. Well, if I sponsor the robotics channel, all the people who consume content on robotics are going to see that that's my specialty. I may not care about the people who build warehouses, right? Or build something else that's not my target market. So if you have segments within your audience, and many associations do, you can break those segments down. That example of the lawyer dealing with the legal issues, put them on the legal channel, put them on the advocacy channel, don't put them on something that's got nothing to do with the law, because that waters down the people who are consuming and seeing that brand. They're the ones who don't care about that versus they do care about it. Sponsorship is more around finding that alignment. And then that can naturally move up to that next level, which is sponsored content, where, you are a thought leader, or you are an educator, or you're being invited into a structure, from a webinar to a panel discussion to just a thought leadership, or maybe even it's a product or service video that is about that topic or piece of content or product or service or best practice, etc. And then you put that into a channel that makes sense, right? And the evolution of websites is turning out just like the evolution of TV, right? When I see a piece of content, I know if it's going to be 30 minutes or 5 minutes or 1 minute. If I can tell by the music what I'm about to get. And so channelizing your content so that the experience for your member is such that, hey, this is a series. I'm going to see more than one of these in a year. And I like the experience. I know when I'm coming back from news, and I know when I'm switching to entertainment, or if I'm switching to something else. And so that evolution of getting diverse content, but then packaging it the way TV packages it, so there's predictability in experience, and there'll be predictability in consumption.
Yeah, that's a great point. The thought there on making your content strategy predictable, I think, is something that really doesn't get talked about enough. I think a lot of folks kind of dip their toes into creating content, but often stop short because they do one or two efforts and it's new, so it's hard. And then they go, well, that didn't work. And then, well, of course, if you watched a show and it was the first time and then it was gone tomorrow, like, you have to build predictability. And that's why it's really important to think about these things as strategic initiatives, right? Even if there's association out there that's listening to us and the gears are turning, commit to one series. Think about it like that. Come up with one modality for your content and stick with it over time and absolutely be consistent, because you're never going to show your members that what this is and what they're going to get out of it and when they could find it, right?
Absolutely. I mean, just like, if I was launching a TV series, I would commit to a certain number of episodes before I decided if I'm going to can it or move forward. You need to have enough frequency to get it out there and see if it's going to be sticky. But the difference is when you go home to watch a TV show, you know where your TV is. When an association publishes content, do you know where that content is? Is it a video on YouTube? Is it in my webinar file? Is it in the podcast file? Is it in my blog? And so if I miss it on the newsletter, I probably can't find it. Yeah. And so is the reason that new piece of content, that it's not performing, is it because of the quality of the content, or just members couldn't find it and you relied solely on your newsletter and maybe a couple of social media posts to try and expose it? Why your TV is in the same place every day, you need to consolidate all your content to one spot on your website. Think of that TV metaphor, so that when someone comes to consume, they don't have to know if it's a video or an audio or a podcast or an article or whatever. They can just find it. And they didn't have to rely on the newsletter, that they actually had the foresight to go, you know what, I need to learn something. And the association was top of mind as the place to go. That's when you have authority. And your sponsorship revenue, how does that tie into all that? It's the money that becomes the fuel so that your content and your content experience are good enough to create that result.
Yeah, member experience is so profoundly important. I think MX typically it's limited to the AMS, email, automation, AI conversation, which is valid. But MX goes all the way down to just, hey, folks, what's your navigation on your website? don't need to overthink this stuff, right? Hey, if you grab like your niece and you tell her to go somewhere on the website and she can't figure it out with how good younger people are with technology, like we got a real problem, right? So all that is to say is it easy to find and consume content on your website?
And if it's not only do you have a member issue, because there goes member value, because if them not finding it, they think you don't have it. So they just leave. And they may not come back. And if they don't come back, well, good luck with the advertising and sponsorship revenue categories that rely on editorial traffic to generate revenue. So the member experience and member value and revenue, that's a continuation. It's a circle that they go hand in glove.
Yeah, absolutely. And like going back to advertising and how it ties into this current topic is that if the website isn't in a good place and you're not set up to actually distribute content effectively, meaning that it's easy to find and discoverability is really high across mediums, where I Google search, hey, how is carbon fiber made, right? I can go and I could read that. Maybe I'm still in, I'm about to exit college, something like this, and I land on your association. Am I going to bump into the next piece of content, which is also applicable to my professional path, right? If you do that, is recruitment potentially going up or is it going down? Because we have to remember, especially if you're global folks, but even if you're not, your website is you in some regard. Yeah, and of course, you are also your conference and you are also your education and you are also your advocacy. But through the member experience, you're meeting most people, or people are mostly meeting you online before you can see them in person.
Especially in this day and age.
Of course, right? And if we're talking about truly growing our membership base, are you going to be able to shake everyone's hand at the annual conference? No, we have to accept that we are living in a digital age, and to scale in some regard means that you need to be good at digital, right? Because you just can't give everyone that one-on-one treatment. I mean, I think that's more than obvious, right? So the prescription here is kind of self-evident that you need to have a good online experience. So that being said, recruitment becomes a discoverability problem. Retention becomes a value problem. And if you're doing both, then you're really covering your bases. And this goes back to the opening of this podcast, is that if you're doing both well, it actually becomes very easy to generate non-dues revenue.
Because you have the traffic and you have the data. Like, that's the beautiful thing about digital, is you learn by the experience. So your example of the member coming and finding that piece of content and then having it redirect to the next place in the journey they should go, all of that data is captured in analytics so that you can learn from it. So you can start to understand, well, what I thought was a great content calendar was actually pretty good, but based on what members' footprints in the sand, if you will, we can actually tweak it and do more of what is really performing and do less of what is not performing, and make sure that the value for the sponsors and advertisers around that content does well. And then on the individual content marketing solutions that we sold with sponsors, all of that data gets shared. And be transparent, because they're looking at that and going, every single person who consumed that content is in my target audience. So it's a pure audience.
Yeah, so I want to linger on this a little further. Of course, we're talking about digital here, with opposed to traditional. We have the value of the data. So in that regard, what can we really make use of, and what is the true value of the data that we get out of both creating content and then employing digital inventory to engage with our sponsors?
It is just so important. I mean, 76% of ad spend is on digital today because it's measurable. 76%. And if I ask any of our association clients, are they is 76% of their spend digital, they'll say, no, it's way lower. Well, that's an opportunity. So if you can resolve the issue of making your website a destination of member value, a member experience where you can find the content and great content that you can consume, whether it's editorial or sponsored, well, not only does that help recruitment and retention, but it gives you the data to stay aligned with the ever-changing needs of membership. And it also allows you to take that data one more layer deeper down into segmenting your membership into groups, or maybe even eventually down to individual membership value, where I can start to use the behavior of an individual member to serve them content that's appropriate based on what they've been doing. And that's when members, and let's face it, that's what happens when you go to YouTube. That's what happens when you go to social media. That's what happens on so many websites today. And young people appreciate it because it helps them filter out the noise. So using that data to better service your member and better service your staff on what works, what doesn't, what links work, what formats work, what topics work, will generate a better experience, and a better experience will give you the opportunity to generate more non-dues revenue to invest in your mission. So data is king. And for those who are still relying on the lanyards and the conference sponsorships, which are primarily non-measurable, just think about what happens when that 60-year-old marketing person retires and in comes a 35-year-old, and they come and look at your media kit and go, I can't measure that, I can't measure that, I can't measure that, I can't measure that. And they have 100 other choices to spend their money on. That's when people leave the association. And so don't wait. Start immediately. Start evolving your website into a member value and start working on and communicating with your sponsors and going, if you could speak as an expert and we gave you that venue to talk to our members, what would you speak on? And what you have to do then is vet it. Is it good? Does it fit? And come up with some standards. So for example, if you come up with a standard like a 20-minute show or a 3-minute video, don't vary from it. Stick to it. People like predictability. If there's going to be multiple pieces of content, don't have one that's an hour long and the next one 2 minutes long. Stick to a format that works and force your sponsors and advertisers to fit into your structure because you know your member best.
Yeah, well said. There's just no escaping the importance of data in this day and age. You know, a lot of folks are using data through the current tech stack that they're using. But what's really special about the data that you get out of your content is that it really is the validation that you're providing the information that folks really need. Because again, going back to the analogy, if in your industry the conversation's this big, but you occupy this sliver, that's a huge gap that you're not providing for your member.
We've allowed, I mean, look at how big social media has become because of data. So what we as associations have been doing is we've been paying for the content. We put the content on their platforms. They get the data. We pay for it. They get they get the advertising revenue and the data. We don't get any of it. We don't know who the people are. They do. Yeah. So we've actually been fueling our own demise. We've been fueling our competitors as opposed to using social media as an awareness opportunity to pull people into your brand. So we have to kind of rejig that thinking, that thought process, and go, data is power. We need the data in order to truly meet the needs of our members and stay aligned. The only way we're going to do it is if we control the platforms that people are consuming content on. And so that's your website.
Absolutely. I know our marketing folks, their ears probably perked up at that, but I really have to say it, like, that is not to say, folks, like Dan said, don't use social media, don't use these platforms that extend your reach, but take advantage of what they're putting out. Don't give in to what they are. right? You want to use them to extend your reach, but you do not want to take the value that you could bring to your industry and attribute that to, say, YouTube or, LinkedIn, or because, even LinkedIn kind of stands out as that both you can put your articles, your webinars, you can put basically everything inside of LinkedIn if you really wanted to.
Would you allow LinkedIn or YouTube to be, I don't know, just randomly show up in the middle of your magazine or the middle of your LMS or the middle of your conference? I don't think so. Because you're controlling the experience in those member values, and you're controlling the revenue model. Well, you got to think of your website in the same way. And if you're not, then you are basically, you're giving up control. You're and you're really reinforcing what young people are learning, which is, hey, I can get this content for free. Why do I have to be a member? And so I would encourage all of you, if you want to take a quick test, look at the size of your e-newsletter mailing list and compare it to the size of your membership data, your membership list. What I often see is that the e-newsletter size is 3-4x times the size of the membership. That means there's that many people who care about your content to be on your list, but don't care enough to pay. That's the opportunity gap. If your content was really good and some of it was gated for member only, you're going to separate the people who go, you know what, it's worth it. I'm going to be a member. And if you're relying on members for volunteerism, for future board members, for all of the things that we in the nonprofit world rely on members to do, we have to nurture them down that path. We have to first convert them, and then we have to nurture them and give them value all the way along that journey. And so that's the way to do it. And so social media is, again, I'm not suggesting you don't use social. It's an awareness opportunity. It's a huge opportunity, but it is not the place you want them to consume the final content.
Yeah, I want to hammer that point home, right? You shouldn't be exporting your value out onto these platforms because all you're doing is reinforcing that they're useful. Again, I go to this a lot, but just think through the POV of the member, or a prospective member in this case, and use a little bit of sympathy along the way, right? I have X dollars in my pocket. I'm trying to learn about something in my field. I do a query. It's given to me. Oh, wow, that was easy. I found something. What's going to prevent me from just being reinforced that I could find this easily on, say, my next YouTube search, or find it else on LinkedIn? Which, look, it's great that we do live in this age where folks and kids can access so much information, but I just think it's a bit unjust for associations to be doing the work and not being attributed for the value that they put in.
Absolutely. And there's a gap still, especially in consistency of quality between what you find online and what you find on an association's website on average. And that is that brand authenticity that you have as an association. So before that gets narrowed any more than it already is, leverage it. Build that audience and monetize that audience and reinvest that money in more and better content and keep that circle going, and you'll have an association that endures forever.
Yeah, absolutely. You need to attribute the value that you're putting out to your website. You want to train that person out there. You want to train them to go, oh, that organization has the answers. They are the authority. If we don't do that, we just reinforce that, well, essentially you aren't the authority, and that the authority is this amorphous blob of search queries. But that is the great opportunity for every association out there. You have the history, you have the subject matter experts, right? You have the mission. You are the authority. But unless you're, again, participating in that conversation and making that conversation home on your website, then you're doing yourself a bit of a disservice.
Right. And you touched on member journey earlier, but back to the data, if I have the data, I can for information because maybe downloading an industry report or whatever requires them to do that. I can then convert them into membership. And now I can see if they're engaging on a regular basis. And if I have an LMS, are they starting to take my courses? Are they coming to my conferences? Do they attend my webinars? Who are the ones that are going deeper? And who are the ones that we need to nudge a little bit because they're not taking advantage of all of the offerings because they're busy and they just didn't notice? And how do I use that data to segregate those groups so I'm not over emailing the ones that shouldn't be over emailed, and I'm emailing appropriately to the people who need to be nudged to leverage the opportunities of membership? And, I'm a longtime member of the Entrepreneurs Organization, and you hit a point where if you've done some volunteer work, if you've, been on a board, if you've engaged in some of the conference content where you're a member for life, but it's that 1 to 5 year zone where someone joined because they needed something, but did they stay in that 1 to 5 years? If you can get them through that, you've got that member for life opportunity, that future board member, that future committee member. So you really got to hone in on that 1 to 5 and say, how do I, stop the churn and make it so that those people are getting value? And we touched on some of the ways of doing it: content, leveraging sponsors, member experience. At the end of the day, it's just making your website a member value equal or better than your annual conference.
Yeah, it's a great point, and worth reiterating that if you put all your value off your site, meaning just very typically from what we see at what we do here at Worker BETV, is that folks are using YouTube players for their video content. And I get it. It's easy, right? And, who thinks having a YouTube channel is a bad idea? I get it from like a surface level. But what you're missing out is, well, like you said, the data. Sure, you get an analytics sheet, but it really stops there. There's going to be no way for you to introduce tactics where you can actually use any of that for recruitment. And you're really hoping on a prayer that someone either Googles the organization because maybe you ended the piece of content effectively enough where they're curious on looking up who you are, or what, they go to channel, then about, then down to link and click that, then maybe up to membership and then start to read. You know what I mean? We're creating such a distance here where if the strategy was, let's make our website the destination, that's where membership lives. And then now we have more data that we could actually see that email list that you're talking about. Hey, maybe it's 50,000. If we acted upon these things better and more consistently, maybe that list is actually 100,000.
Absolutely.
So let's just kind of summarize the conversation here a little bit. There's a lot of room, a lot of opportunity out there for associations when it comes to revenue. And the topic of monetization is really important.
And it's a big chicken and egg, as you know, in that it's, most associations run pretty lean. They need help. Sometimes they need to outsource. It could be content strategy. It could be technology. It could be something as simple as making a podcast for them or doing live streaming. That requires money and it requires time. And so if you have the revenue stream, you can afford to either hire or outsource to do it at a world-class level to generate that engagement, which will generate the next round of revenue so the circle continues. And so digital revenue is just as important for website member value as your exhibitor and sponsorship and advertising is for your conference. And it needs to be treated with the same level of respect and planning that the conference is, because it's all year long. And it has a much higher impact on recruitment and retention than the conference does, because the conference is 3 or 4 days a year. This is 365 days a year. So get together with your folks and have a holistic meeting around, is our website providing member value? And are we optimizing the revenue so we can invest in it to make it provide the member value it should?
Well said. Having a good digital strategy, really realizing the value of what your website could be, all hugely important and really an underutilized tool when it comes to non-dues revenue.
Great.
Well, I think it'd be a bit of a missed opportunity if we did not linger on the topic of sponsored content. And, there's people that, have strong opinions about it, which is totally understandable, right? Hey, we're nonprofits. Our mission here is member first. And it's easy with not enough understanding, I think, of the bigger conversation to kind of end up at the wrong assumptions about these things just through a little bit of a lack of awareness. So I think we should linger and just clean up that, nothing in here that we've touched on is meant to prioritize profit over mission.
Right. There's a lot of associations who have those feelings, and their attitude, again, up until the pandemic, was, no, we're not doing it because we don't need the money. Then the pandemic hit and it realized I need the money. And now as more and more consumption of time and energy is digital, they certainly need the non-dues revenue. So it's not like yes or no, it's like how. And so lean into it, but put rules on it. Right. And those rules, I mean, some industries have been very forthcoming with rules, like the medical industry, where there are just certain standards that have to be met. You don't meet that standard, you're not on, period. Like, you don't bend the rules. These are the rules and they conform to it or not. And so the challenge is when you don't have any industry rules. Well, you got to create them. And so you got to think about, my members are busy, they have a lot of time, so don't allow people to give you a 20-minute video when that same message could be done in 2 to 3 minutes. Don't allow them to, do something that has calls to action that are inappropriate, or language that is inappropriate, or that is a sales pitch and has nothing to do with education. Draw the line in the sand. And that's why we mentioned earlier, like, channelizing your content forces you to create a standard for each channel. You fit into the channel or you don't fit into the channel. And if you have a webinar that's 60 minutes, we don't put it on a 20-minute show. It fits into the webinar channel. And that's where your opportunities are. And so you guide the sponsors. They are happy to be guided. They want to be guided because they know you know how to communicate with members. And they're learning the best way to communicate to members. So leverage your expertise, set up the rules, and enjoy the revenue while controlling the structure and getting good content for your members.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. I think also a real good rule of thumb here is the sponsor's contribution actually beneficial to the member? That's a high level one, right? And then when it comes to like the level of content, well, for me, it's got to be that transparency is key. I think there is a place, actually we know, you and I both know, there is a place for sponsors to do something more where, say, people that are a bit more cautious lean towards automatically. And what I mean by that, of course, is the more traditional promotional video. But here's the thing, going back to the conversation, that what section do you play a part of? Let's say that we're in a very technological space, right? Our association. Say our exhibitors are mostly innovators and they're competing for the better, stronger, faster piece of equipment. Well, that's part of the conversation. And that's what your members actually want to keep up with, as well as Absolutely. The competency, right? The great knowledge base of your industry. So how do we navigate that? Well, it's very easy. Just make it easily transparent. Like going back to having navigation that really is easy to identify, like channels of knowledge, have a place where, hey, that sponsored content that is about, it's a features and benefit. Like everyone knows what they're getting to when they read or watch that piece of content. This is Marcus Inc.'s video about why we're awesome. Got it. Yeah,
absolutely.
Where people get cautious is when, I think is where you're going to go to next, is just, well, is my content marketing going to read like an infomercial and now I don't feel good about it?
Right.
100%. That is not where you go. Like you said, it's up to you to guide the sponsor and how they can contribute best.
You don't give up editorial control just because you have sponsored content. You remain in that control, and you define those standards, and you vet the content or you don't accept it. And you structure your agreements accordingly so that you have the last right to put it on, and it meets whatever those standards are from a length, structure, educational standpoint. And watch them all line up and conform, because they will. And it's really not that hard, because they're smart enough today to know that people don't want to be sold. People want to be educated, and they will self-engage with organizations after they've been educated. So their way of now creating content is not all that different than the way you're creating content.
Yeah, the real plot twist here is that what do we see as the most current and relevant marketing trend for profits? It's doing content marketing,
Which is an educational style of communication.
Exactly, right? So it's like they're already wanting that to do that themselves, at least if they're have a progressive marketing department, right? They'll understand the value of not going up and wanting to go, well, for $5.99 you can get X, Y, and Z. They're going to know we're going to go in here and we're going to impress people with our competency, and they're going to follow the path that I want to take them down because they actually respect our company. Absolutely. They understand that. Yeah. All right. Well, it's been a pleasure, Dan. Thanks so much for coming on to the podcast.
My pleasure.
I think we definitely gave a lot of folks some good points to think about, and perhaps they can start their own conversation with their organization.
Terrific. Thank you.
All right, that's our show. To our viewers, thank you for joining us. If you want to learn more about how to amplify your association's relevance and growth, check us out at workerbee.tv.